The summer of 1886 brought scorching heat to the Wyoming Territory, turning the grasslands golden and the riverbeds to dust. But for Garrett Mountain McCade, the massive cowboy who stood 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 300 pounds of solid muscle, that brutal summer would bring something far more important than weather. A chance to prove that the biggest bodies often hold the gentlest hearts, and that sometimes salvation comes in the form of a desperate child's plea. Mountain McCade had earned his nickname honestly through sheer physical presence that made grown men step aside when he walked down a street. At 39, he had spent 2 decades working as a ranch hand, cattle driver, and occasional law enforcement when towns needed someone whose mere size could prevent violence. He was known throughout the territory as a man of few words, but absolute reliability, someone who kept his promises, protected the weak, and never used his enormous strength for anything except honest work. But despite his imposing size, Mountain was fundamentally alone. His appearance frightened children, made women nervous, and caused most people to see him as more beast than man. He had long since accepted that his life would be solitary, that he would work until his body gave out, and that he would die without ever knowing the warmth of family or the softness of love. That resignation shattered on a blazing afternoon in late July when Mountain was riding between ranches looking for seasonal work. He had just crested a hill overlooking a small homestead when he heard something that made his blood run cold, a child screaming with the kind of terror that spoke of genuine emergency rather than simple childhood drama. Mountain urged his horse toward the sound and found a little girl, maybe 6 years old, running toward him with her small legs pumping desperately and tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. Her dress was torn, her feet were bare and bleeding, and her eyes held panic that no child should ever have to experience. "Help!" she screamed when she saw him, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please help! Save my mama, please, mister, you have to save my mama." Mountain dismounted faster than a man his size should have been able to move, dropping to one knee to bring himself closer to the child's eye level. "Easy now, little one. I'm here to help. Tell me what's wrong with your mama." The girl grabbed onto Mountain's massive arm with both tiny hands, her fingers barely able to wrap around his forearm. "She's dying. She had the baby, but something's wrong and there's so much blood, and she told me to run and find help. But there's nobody, and I've been running forever, and please, please, save my mama." Mountain felt his heart clench at the desperation in her voice. A childbirth gone wrong in an isolated homestead with no doctor for miles. He'd seen this tragedy before, and he knew that minutes could mean the difference between life and death. "Show me where," Mountain said, his deep voice gentle despite the urgency. "Climb up on my horse and show me the way to your mama." And that's when you realize this isn't just about saving a life. It's about a giant man discovering he has more to offer than just physical strength, which is exactly why you should hit that subscribe button right now. Because watching how this massive cowboy becomes a hero to a desperate family will restore your faith in human compassion. The little girl scrambled onto Mountain's horse with his help, and he swung up behind her, wrapping one protective arm around her small body to keep her secure as they rode hard toward the homestead she pointed out. During the frantic ride, she told him her name was Lucy. She was 6 years old, her papa had died last winter, and her mama had been trying to have the baby alone because they couldn't afford to bring a doctor all the way from town. When they reached the small cabin, Mountain could see the situation was as dire as Lucy had described. He lifted the child down, then burst through the door to find a young woman, probably late 20s, lying on a blood-soaked bed, pale as death, with a newborn baby crying weakly beside her. The woman's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, and Mountain knew from bitter experience that she had maybe minutes left without immediate intervention. But you haven't seen the most important part yet. Mountain's size and strength had always been his defining characteristics, but what most people didn't know was that he'd grown up as the oldest of 8 children in a family where his mother had taught him everything about childbirth, infant care, and emergency medicine, because doctors were scarce on the frontier and women often had to rely on whoever was present when crisis struck. He moved with practiced efficiency, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he assessed the situation. The woman had hemorrhaged badly after delivery. The placenta hadn't delivered completely, causing dangerous bleeding that would kill her if not addressed immediately. The baby, though crying, was breathing and seemed healthy despite being born under such terrible circumstances. "Lucy," Mountain said, his voice calm despite the urgency, "I need you to be very brave. I'm going to help your mama, but I need you to hold your new baby brother or sister and keep them warm. Can you do that for me?" Lucy nodded with the solemn determination of a child who understood that adult lives depended on her ability to follow instructions. Mountain wrapped the baby in clean cloth and placed the infant carefully in Lucy's arms, showing her how to support the tiny head. Then, he turned his attention to saving the mother's life, using techniques his own mother had taught him decades ago. Techniques most cowboys would never learn, but that Mountain had practiced dozens of times, helping isolated ranch families survive childbirth emergencies. For the next hour, Mountain worked with focused intensity, using clean water to remove the retained tissue causing the hemorrhage, applying pressure to control bleeding, and administering herbs from the woman's own medicine cabinet that he recognized as useful for stopping blood loss. His enormous hands, which looked like they could crush bones without effort, moved with the delicate precision of a skilled surgeon, treating this dying woman with the same care he would show handling the most fragile glass. Slowly, impossibly, the bleeding stopped. Color began returning to the woman's pale face. Her breathing deepened and steadied. When her eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing she saw was a giant of a man kneeling beside her bed, his weathered face showing relief and something that looked almost like tears. "Your baby's healthy," Mountain said quietly. "It's a girl. And your daughter Lucy was the bravest person I've ever met, running for miles to find help. You should be proud of both your children." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she looked past Mountain to where Lucy sat in a rocking chair, carefully cradling the newborn with fierce protective love written across her small face. "Lucy, you saved me, baby girl. You saved us all." "No, Mama," Lucy said seriously. "The mountain man saved you. I just found him." Wait, don't miss what happens next. Over the following days, Mountain stayed at the homestead to ensure both mother and baby survived the critical period after traumatic childbirth. He learned that the woman's name was Rebecca Walsh. She was 28, and her husband had died 6 months earlier in a riding accident, leaving her alone and pregnant on an isolated homestead with a 6-year-old daughter and no resources except determination and courage. Rebecca had been trying to manage everything alone, tending her small garden, caring for Lucy, preparing for a birth she knew would be dangerous without medical help. When labor started earlier than expected and complications arose, she had sent Lucy running for help, knowing it was their only chance of survival, but not really believing anyone would be close enough to save them. "Why did you stay?" Rebecca asked on the 3rd day, when she was strong enough to sit up and nurse her newborn daughter. "You saved our lives, and I'm grateful beyond words, but most men would have ridden away once the emergency was over. Why are you still here?" Mountain was repairing a fence that had been falling down, his massive frame making quick work of labor that would have taken Rebecca weeks to complete. He paused, considering the question carefully. "Because Lucy asked me to save her mama, and I figure saving someone means making sure they actually survive, not just keeping them alive for a few hours before they die from neglect or exhaustion. You can't manage this homestead alone with a newborn and a 6-year-old. You need help until you're strong enough to handle things yourself." Rebecca studied this enormous man who moved through her home with surprising gentleness, who spoke softly to Lucy and handled the newborn with the careful reverence of someone who understood how fragile life could be. "Most people are frightened of you, aren't they? Because of your size?" Mountain's smile was sad but not bitter. "Most people see a monster when they look at me. Can't really blame them. I'm bigger than any man has a right to be, and people fear what they don't understand. I've gotten used to being alone. It's simpler that way." "Lucy isn't frightened of you," Rebecca observed. "She follows you around like a devoted puppy and talks about you like you're the greatest hero who ever lived." Mountain glanced toward where Lucy was helping him sort nails, her small hands working with careful concentration. Children see hearts instead of sighs. Lucy knows I helped her mama, so she trusts me. It's a gift I don't take for granted. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what comes next. As weeks turned into a month, Mountain found himself unable to leave the homestead, despite his original intention to stay only until Rebecca recovered. There was always one more repair that needed finishing, one more heavy task that Rebecca couldn't manage alone, one more reason to delay his departure just a little longer. But the real reason he stayed had nothing to do with fences or chores and everything to do with the way Lucy's face lit up when he came in from working, the way Rebecca smiled at him over morning coffee, and the way baby Rose seemed to settle most peacefully when he held her in his enormous hands and sang Norwegian lullabies his own mother had taught him decades ago. He was falling in love with all three of them, with Lucy's fierce bravery, with baby Rose's perfect trust, and with Rebecca's strength and determination to build a life for her children despite circumstances that would have broken most people. Rebecca was falling too, though she fought it, because it seemed impossible that this gentle giant who had saved her life would want to tie himself to a widow with 2 children and a failing homestead. But she couldn't deny the way her heart beat faster when Mountain walked into a room, or the way she felt safe for the first time since her husband's death, or the way her daughters bloomed under his patient attention. The turning point came during a late summer storm when lightning struck the barn and set it ablaze. Mountain rushed into the burning building to save Rebecca's 2 horses and milk cow, emerging with singed clothing and minor burns, but all 3 animals safe. Rebecca watched this massive man risk his life for her livestock, and something broke open in her carefully protected heart. "Why did you do that?" she demanded after treating his burns, her hands shaking with reaction to how close he'd come to dying. "Those animals aren't worth your life." "Nothing is worth your life." Mountain looked at her with surprise, as if the answer should be obvious. "They're your livelihood, Rebecca. Without them, you and the girls couldn't survive here. Of course I was going to save them." "I don't want your sacrifices," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want you risking your life for my animals or my homestead. I want." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "What do you want?" Mountain asked gently, his large hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "I want you to stay," Rebecca whispered. "Not as a hired hand or a temporary helper, but as my husband, as Lucy's father, as Rose's papa. I want you to stay because you want to be here, because you love us as much as we love you. I want to stop being grateful to you for saving my life and start building a life with you." Mountain felt tears blur his vision. This enormous man who had believed he would die alone, who had accepted that his size made him unlovable, who had never dared hope that anyone would see past his intimidating exterior to the gentle soul beneath. "Rebecca, I'm not the kind of man women usually choose. I'm too big, too rough, too perfect for us," Rebecca interrupted firmly. "Lucy already calls you her Mountain and asks every night if you're going to stay forever. Rose sleeps best in your arms. And her voice caught. "I feel safe with you in ways I never felt with my first husband. You saved my life. But more than that, you've shown me what real strength looks like. The kind that protects instead of dominates, that nurtures instead of controls, that chooses gentleness even when it could choose force." Their first kiss was tender and tentative, this massive man and this determined woman who had found each other through a child's desperate plea and discovered that the most unlikely partnerships often create the strongest bonds. The proposal came naturally that evening, with Lucy watching hopefully and baby Rose sleeping peacefully in Rebecca's arms. Mountain knelt before Rebecca, an enormous man making himself vulnerable, and spoke with the careful sincerity of someone offering his entire heart. "Rebecca Walsh, I came to this homestead planning to save a life and ride away. Instead, I found a family that makes me want to stay forever. I love Lucy's bravery, Rose's trust, and your incredible strength. I want to be the father your daughters deserve, the husband you need, and the partner who helps you build something beautiful on this land. Will you marry me? Will you let me prove that the biggest bodies can hold the most love? Rebecca pulled him up and into her arms despite their size difference, her answer muffled against his massive chest. "Yes, Mountain McCade. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll let you be the father my daughters already believe you are. Yes to building a life where size doesn't matter nearly as much as the size of your heart." Lucy's delighted squeal woke baby Rose, who looked up at Mountain's huge face and smiled, her first real smile given to the man who had saved her life before she ever opened her eyes. The wedding took place in autumn, with Lucy serving as flower girl and Rose sleeping peacefully in a basket beside the altar. When the traveling preacher asked if Mountain took Rebecca as his wife, his answer filled the small church with absolute conviction. "I take this woman and her children as my family, bound not by blood but by choice and love. I promise to use my strength to protect them, my gentleness to nurture them, and every day of my life to prove that being chosen by this family is the greatest blessing I could receive." Rebecca's vows were equally powerful. "Mountain, you came into our lives when we were dying and gave us not just survival, but hope. You've shown Lucy that real heroes are gentle giants. You've given Rose a father who handles her like precious glass, and you've taught me that the strongest love comes in the most unexpected packages. I promise to value you for who you are, rather than fear what you look like, and to build with you a family where everyone is valued for their heart rather than their size." Years passed, and the Walsh homestead, now the McCade Ranch, flourished under Mountain and Rebecca's joint management. Lucy grew into a confident young woman who told everyone about the day she saved her family by finding the bravest man alive. Rose grew strong and healthy, calling Mountain Papa from her first words, and never knowing a life without his gentle presence. Rebecca bore Mountain 2 more children, a son who inherited his father's size but also his gentleness, and a daughter who was tiny like her mother but fierce like Lucy. The family became known throughout Wyoming territory as proof that families are built from love rather than biology, and that the most beautiful relationships grow from the soil of desperate need met by generous hearts. On their 10th anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the yard, Rebecca reflected on the day Lucy had run for miles to find help. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Lucy had found someone else that day? Some other cowboy who might not have known how to save me?" Mountain pulled her close, this woman who had transformed his lonely existence into a life filled with love and purpose. "I try not to think about it, because imagining you and the girls without me makes my heart hurt. But mostly I just thank God that Lucy found me instead of someone else, because saving your life led me to the family I'd stopped believing existed." "Best day of my life," Rebecca said, kissing him while their children pretended not to notice. "The day my 6-year-old daughter convinced a gentle giant that we were worth saving, and he convinced us that size has nothing to do with the capacity to love." If this story moved you, if it reminded you that heroes come in all sizes and that the biggest hearts often come in the most imposing packages, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of desperate pleas answered, gentle giants finding love, and families built from the courage to see past appearances to the souls beneath. From homestead emergencies to family celebrations, every story we tell proves that the greatest transformations happen when someone is brave enough to ask for help, and someone else is brave enough to give it. This is where gentle giants find families, where desperate children find heroes, and where love proves that appearances mean nothing compared to the size of someone's heart.